Dean Gordonitis, Unleash This Book Reviews, bringing you new book reviews on contemporary literature, classic literature, and sometimes stuff that you guys send to me. I have a lot of viewers out there who are trying to make it as an author, and I love looking at your stuff, maybe, getting you a few more readers, stuff like that, and that's what I got this week going. Joseph A. Turkot's Darkin, A Journey East, which is a fantasy novel. Very similar, gets a lot of its roots from Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien's classic stuff, which really set the standard in fantasy and has been the bar to reach for ever since it was published. I mean, I don't think that's really arguable, and that's what we have here, an effort to sort of emulate Tolkien's fantasy worlds. Yeah, excuse me. That's what happens when you drink too many carbonated beverages, I suppose. Okay. Anyways, what we got here is a fantasy novel, and if you guys have checked out my Hobbit review, I think you know a lot of my feelings towards fantasy works. They just don't normally tend to be my cup of tea. And sadly, that was sort of the case here with this book, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't a good book. It just wasn't a good book for me and my particular taste. So I'm going to go into what I didn't kind of like about it, the pitfalls I saw in it from my point of view, and then explain why, if you're into fantasy, this probably is a book that you want to read. One of the big things that gets on my mind when it comes to fantasy literature, sci-fi literature, and stuff like that is language, and I've talked about this before, where when it comes into the fantasy world, a lot of things have to be made up with new names and stuff like that that you have to learn how to pronounce and memorize what they mean and stuff like that. And that's the same case here with Darkin. What the way that the author kind of gets by this, the way he manages to explain all this stuff to us, the reader, is by revolving the book around the main character, Darkin, who has been a slave his whole life until he escapes, and that's when the book starts. So he is very closed-minded when it comes to culture just because he's never seen anything outside of the farm that he's worked on before. That makes it very easy for the author to kind of explain to us, the readers, what everything means. Whenever there's a new country that's spoken, whenever there's a new character that comes into play, whenever there's new magic that somebody can use, whenever there's new enemies that are going to attack. Darkin doesn't know anything about it, and he can say, what's this? What's that? What's the story behind this? What's the story behind that? I don't know because I've been a slave my whole life. And it's kind of an easy way for the author to explain to us the world of Darkin. And while I completely understand that this has to be done and that really there's only a select number of ways to kind of get that information about, I just don't like that feeling of constantly being told new made-up things and being explained what those made-up things are. It's just not my thing. But that's a gripe, I think, with all fantasy and not all science fiction, but a lot of science fiction. And I know that a lot of people really enjoy that. So while it's sort of a knock coming from me, other people really might not be concerned about that at all. The book is really well edited though for a self-published book. This is a self-published book. You can get it from the author's website, which I will post down in the description box. I believe also on Amazon, which I will post a link to as long as I find it on Amazon. And a lot of times with self-published work, what you get is poorly edited stuff that you read and you find mistakes in grammar or syntax or punctuation, all that kind of stuff. And that didn't happen here. So whether Turkot had a lot of family members helping him out rereading this and he read it over a few times, or whether he hired a good edit, very important. And I'm going to tell all of you that who are in the process of writing, get a good edit, because even if the material itself isn't that great, a good edit will make it seem more professional. And if the material is amazing, a bad edit can ruin the whole thing. He nailed it here on this one. Very well done. Could see this published in bookstores in the fantasy area. There's a lot of fantasy books out there that seem to kind of get read for, a few months around the bookshelves, and then they kind of like disappear and don't really make a huge impact. And really, how many fantasy books out there other than, say, like Lord of the Rings, the Game of Thrones, I believe it's called. Man, I'm bad with my fantasy stuff, right? But yeah, Martin's Game of Thrones. I think that's what it's called. There's not a whole lot, anyway, what I'm trying to say, that really stick for a long time, but there is a ton that kind of just go through the cycle of being a published book and then going away. And that's the kind of the feel I get here. Is Darkin a groundbreaking work that is going to change the world of fantasy literature for 50 years, 100 years? No, it's not. Is it enjoyable read for somebody who's into, say, Magic the Gathering or World of Warcraft or tons of different video games out there, like Demon Souls, for example? You know, that fantasy knight in shining armor sort of thing with mages and wizards and trolls and elves, all that. It's here. It's in this book, and if that's what you like, why not read something that's being published independently by a guy who's pushing to become a real author than, you know, somebody who's sort of established and just constantly pushing out the same, I don't want to say garbage, but you know what I mean. He's making stuff for money and that's his job or whatever. Why not support the independent guy, especially when the content is just as good? And it really is. The stuff here, it's a solid story. There's a journey that goes through different countries and they face different adversaries. A lot of different characters are involved, a lot of cool battle scenes and stuff like that. It's all here if this is your type of stuff. And I am going to recommend it to those of you who are into the fantasy stuff. People like me, I feel like it's kind of been done before. There's the magician. They're not called musicians. They're called vapors, I believe, or vapors in this book, known as Krem, who plays an eerily similar role to Gandalf. Almost a little too similar in that he's sort of the knowledgeable old man who knows his magic, who leads the party for a little bit and then disappears because he has bigger things to do, but he's always sort of around to save you in the nick of time if you need to be. I almost wouldn't be surprised if in book 2 or 3 of this series he comes back as Krem the White instead of just Krem or something like that, you know. But yeah, whatever. Fantasy's never been my thing. You guys know that. I got bashed for my Hobbit review. But a lot of people liked it, and I think that you're going to like this one too. So check it out if fantasy's your thing. If you're more into the literature stuff, the real, you know, the, what do they call it? Fiction-y fiction, not science fiction, more real life fiction, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. I got more of that coming, right? So I'm almost done with Peter Pan. That's about to come your way. That's a fairy tale. I realize that's not really literature, but Don DeLillo, and I'm going to learn to pronounce that name before the review because that's probably wrong, but I am reading White Noise by him, and so far it's great, and I think that you guys that love the bread and butter literature stuff on this channel are going to appreciate that too. Alright, so until I see you next time, it's Dean Gornitis, Unleash This Book Review. See ya!